Hey everyone, in this video we're going to go over React context. This will give us a way to have some sort of global state in a React application. Let's go ahead and get started going over this. So before we begin, let's go ahead and pull up the docs here. This will be kind of important to go over real quick. So I'll put this in the description, but this will kind of goes over what it is and how we can use it. Of course, we'll go in this in a little bit. But what this allows us to do, it allows us to have some sort of global state. And you'll see up here, it gives us a way to avoid passing data through the component tree, like we did previously with our props. Inside of our form here, we pass all of these props in, in our app.js here. Instead of passing things down through the components, down through the tree of our application that way, we can create another file that has global state and then pull those into any component or page in our application that we need it in. And down here, there's a kind of a section on when to use it. I'm not going to go over this too much right now, but there's different times when you might want to use it and when you might want to avoid it. Kind of talking about composition versus having a global state. And so this will be in the description below. I recommend going through it if you have time. It's very useful to kind of go through this as well. So that'll be in the link in the description. Let's go ahead and get started going through this. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of this in a separate file and then use it inside our app.js. So first, let's go and create a new folder in here. So create a new folder, not inside the components. So I'm going to create this inside the source folder right here. Create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder context. Inside of context here, we'll create another file, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and just call this context.js. And this is where we'll store our actual context inside this file. So first, what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and do a const context equals, and we'll do something called createContext, which we can import up here. We can import this from React. So we'll import createContext from React. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and export const, and we'll call this context provider. This will equal a arrow function, and inside of the props here, we're going to pull one in called children, which is a default prop you get with React. And what this will allow us to do is get all the children of whatever this component is wrapped around. And I'll go over that here in a second. But for now, we'll go ahead and just put that there. And then this will be an arrow function. Inside this arrow function, we can put anything we want inside of here, any function or state value that we want to be global. At the very bottom, we need to return our context provider. So we'll do context dot provider, not this context provider function, but context up here dot provider. And then inside of here, we'll go ahead and put in our children. And we also need a value up here, and this value will have all of our state values we want to access across our application. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and just create a basic state value. So let's use our useState to create a state value, and I'll create a function to update that state value. And I'll use that somewhere else in our application, just as an example. So what we'll do here is do a const, and we'll create a state value, we'll call it num and set num. This will equal useState, which will import from React. I'll set a default value of 4 or whatever. And then up here, inside of our imports, we'll import useState. And then down here, I'll create a function that updates the state value. So we'll do a const save number. This will equal just a function with one argument. We'll call it number, arrow function. And then inside of here, we'll do set num like that. We'll pass in our number. So this is just a really basic example. What we could do here is set some login information or maybe a function to get the current logged in user or something along those lines. But for a very basic example, this is what we'll do here. We'll have a state value and a function to update it. Now we want to go ahead and use both of these somewhere else in our application. So what we need to do is pass them into this value prop down here. So what we can do is we can pass in num and save number as values inside of our value prop there. And now to access this everywhere else, we need to wrap this component around our entire application. So we go into our app.js, or no, we go to our index.js here. This has our app component here where we're rendering it. What we can do is inside of React here, what we'll do is we'll create another component right here, and we'll bring in our context provider, and then we'll wrap our app inside of that. So I'll cut out this, and I'll put it right there. Okay, and now we need to go ahead and import that. So up here, I'll import context provider from /context/context like that. And we'll save that. Come back here, and everything's still working. Now let's go ahead and use these two functions. So let's go ahead and in our useEffect, we'll log out our console. We'll console.log our number, and we should get 4. Then we'll go ahead and call this function, and we'll pass in a different number, and then we'll log out this number again, and it should be our new updated number we passed in here. So inside of our app.js, let's go ahead and put this right below the prop text right here. I'll go ahead and create a useEffect. And I had a previous video on this. If you are unfamiliar with how to use this, I had a previous video in the series on useEffect and useState. So I'm not going to go over that too much right here. You can watch that video if you need a refresher on that. But when you go ahead and import the useEffect from React, so we'll import useEffect from React. Now first, let's go ahead and want to console log that num value. Right now, this num variable here is undefined. We need to go ahead and bring in that value from our context file. So what we can do is we'll create a variable const, and I'm going to go ahead and destructure everything inside of this value. Because when we get our state values back, what we'll get is a object here with all of these values. So I'll destructure both of these, and what this will allow us to do is in certain pages only pull out the variables we want. In this case, we'll pull out both of them. And we want to get these values, we need to go ahead and use something called useContext. So we use createContext up here inside of our context file to create a context, and then we can use this useContext function, which also comes from React. So I'll import it from up here, useContext, and that's what allows us to get our state values. So create to create them, and then use to then get them. And then inside of here, the parameters here, we need to pass in our context file. In this case, we called it context.js. We need to pass in context. And then, of course, up here at the top, we need to go ahead and import that. So we'll import context. It's a default export, so we can just do context from ./context/context, capital C. And now we should have our num and our saved number variables. If I go ahead and just log out num, oh, did I not export as a default export? I did not. I meant to put export default here at the bottom. So export default context. Okay. Now with that done, we should be able to, okay, now we come back to application, open up the terminal here, and you see 4 showing up there, which is our default state value saved in num. We set default value here at 4. So we're correctly pulling this value from this file and pulling it into our application. Now I can do the same thing for our save number function, and we can update that state value. I can do a console.log. Actually, first I'll call save number, and I'll pass in 400. And I can go ahead and console.log num. And right now it's not showing our updated number because we need to go ahead and pass in num and set number as dependencies for this useEffect. So what we're doing with this is we're just saying when either of these values are called or when this number is changed, we want to go ahead and rerun this function. That way we can get our updated number as well. So we save that. Then we come back here and we're getting set number is not defined. It's not set number, it's save number. So let's fix that, save number. Okay, now let's come back here, refresh the page here. And now we're getting 4, and then we're getting 400 after we update the number. So we're successfully getting that value. We're then updating it and then logging out that updated value. And you see here, we didn't save this number anywhere in this file. So all of this logic is happening inside this context file, and then we can just log out that same variable again right here, and then get the updated value. So that's how we can save and update state values across the entire application. Now we can create other components in here. We can pull these values in, and now after we run this file, this num value you can pull in any other application will be 400. So we can get our updated values in any other page or component inside of our application that we need to use it in. And that's really it for this video. That's just a really basic example of how this all works. There is other things you can go through here if you want to. This is very useful for like login stuff or like saving user settings, maybe a preferred language or whatever else inside the application. I use it a lot for getting a logged in user or something along those lines. You can follow the same sort of steps here where you have a state variable for the logged in user or their user ID or whatever, and then you can have a function here to update it or to return that value or anything else. So hopefully that was helpful. The links for all the code for this will be in the description below, as well as all links to all the documentation, anything else that might be useful for learning more about this. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.